Good morning. How is everybody this morning? Good to see you. We have several that are out, not feeling well, sick. Remember all of them. Look around. Jay will have announcements later on. Is there anybody else that's not on the announcement sheet that we don't know about? That you do. All right. Turn your Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Marching through the book of 2 Corinthians, Paul's epistle as we have it, second epistle to the church of Corinth, a church that Paul loved greatly. As he deals still, and you know I've said this before, I haven't said it about this book, but Paul in his books had a theological component and then a practical component. And sometimes the theological component, it's not difficult, but it's something that sometimes we get bogged down in. And then the practical aspect of the book we really like from the standpoint of we understand. I think today we're kind of in the I know we're still in the theological aspect of 2 Corinthians. Because Paul, it's almost not always, but almost always half and half. And so we're not there yet. But Paul, in dealing with the theological component in 2 Corinthians, one of the things that he really does is he spends time defending himself in his ministry. And he's going to do that today. But one of the things that he's going to do today in 2 Corinthians 3 is talking about the Old Testament and looking at the difference between spirit and letter. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But he defends himself, especially in the first 6 verses. And he talks about how that they are, talking about the Church of Corinth, his epistle. And we'll see what that means here in a minute. Notice how he begins. He says, do we begin again to commend ourselves? In other words, here we go. We're going to talk about me. Evidently, there were those, notice what he says, or do we need, as some other epistles of commendation to you or letters of commendation from you? Those that had brought these accusations against Paul, we don't really know exactly what they were, but evidently they were something to the effect of false teacher. He's someone you shouldn't listen to. You need to stay away from. He's a bad guy. Because remember, as we know, because the Bible tells us more of the story of Paul than it does a whole lot of folks. The story of Paul, he was a man that persecuted Christians. Now, he did it thinking that what he was doing was right. He did it from a standpoint of practicing his own personal faith, but yet at the same point in time, too, he was wrong. And he admits that he was wrong, and that he admits that he needs to change, and he does change. Paul still admits towards the end of his life, I'm still not where I need to be. I'm still pushing. I'm still growing. I'm still changing. And so as Paul does that, as Paul understands and lives that life, you understand that being a very humble person, sometimes he's also attacked as well. Whatever the exact reason or words or accusations that were made against him, we don't know, but we do know this. We do know that they were there. We do know that they were present, prevalent, and Paul is talking about defending himself. He's done that in the first chapter. He's done it in the second chapter. He does it again, Mr. Suzanne. He does it in the third chapter. And as he does it in this third chapter, he says, do we need letters? Evidently, there were those that had written letters about Paul. There were those that had written letters and talked about Paul and told how you need to stay away from him. You may have, I think I shared with you last week, I've had the experience of maybe not directly my name, but being with others and have folks that have written letters about me and said things about me. Paul is going through this same thing. And so they've written these letters evidently, but Paul says, do I need to find letters? Do I need to find recommendations? Do I need to find folks that will write for me a letter of recommendation that says that I'm all right? He says, I want you to know something. Look in verse 2. You are our epistle, written in our hearts, known and read by all men. He says, you're our letter. In other words, when you stop and think about it, he says, you need to know that we don't need really any letter because you represent the work that we've put in. Now, that's strong wording, because basically what Paul is telling the church of Corinth is, look, you know me. I don't need these letters. You know me. You know what I've done. You know how I've acted. You know how I've behaved. You know how I've taught. You know what I've taught. And in doing such, I don't need letters, because you are the mirror of what I have put in. You're the reflection of what I've put in. You are the epistle that we needed. Now, we understand, of course, epistle is a letter. It's our letter. When we think about, we could talk about a lot of different ideas of, well, what does a letter do? Well, a letter, usually has a signature. A letter usually has some information. A letter usually tells something that needs to be told. And all of those things and all of those cute little ideas that go along with this metaphor, I'm saving them. Just suffice it to say, I'm saving them for a sermon. But Paul says, you're our letter. Notice something I should back up for just a second. Notice in verse 1, I want to convey to you something that you probably already know. When he asks the question, he says, do we need, as some other epistles of commendation to you or letters of commendation from you? The implied answer is no. Now, we can get that in English. We really get it in the Greek text. It's something that you can't translate, but there's a word there that's really not translated from a standpoint of a question. But when it has the negative, when it has the word no, the Greek word may, when it has that word in the front or it's somewhere in the sentence, the idea is that the question is implying a no answer. That's what Paul is saying. We don't really need a letter, because you're our letter. You are the letter. You are our references. And then he goes on in verse 3. Clearly, you are an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh. That is the heart. Who's the minister? You, he says, you are an epistle of Christ. And notice, ministered by us, served by us. The change came not from the standpoint of, as he says, flesh, not as on tables of stone, but on flesh, on the heart. The change of a Christian may be seen in a way. A Christian more at ease, content, joyful, at peace. But from the standpoint, remember, the Jewish sign in the Old Testament was circumcision for males. Well, that's not what Paul says. Paul says here, the Spirit of God that works upon us now is not that which is just simply laws impressed upon a stone, but it's the change of the heart. The individual is changed. The individual, of course, changes their actions, but it's the individual's heart, the individual's attitude, the individual's understanding. We have, he says, such trust through Christ toward God. Not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God. The confidence that Paul had, the assurance that Paul had, all came from Jesus Christ in verse 4. Paul says, We trust through Christ towards God. What we have is not from us. I was talking to an individual just recently, and they said they were talking really about their blessings. And they ascribed their blessings. They said, I don't really thank God for my blessing. I sat there, couldn't think of what to say that would be appropriate in the midst of the conversation. But as they went on, and sometimes silence is the best because they begin to explain what they believe. Their blessings ultimately came from luck, from them making the right decisions and from luck. That was what they believed. Now, that's not what Paul says. Paul says that really all my confidence came through Christ. Not that we are sufficient of ourselves. Where does your sufficiency come from? Where does your assurance come from? Well, it comes from God. What God? Because remember at Corinth, they're polytheistic in many ways. They're multi-gods. He says, the God who made us. But he made us, notice what he says, verse 6, sufficient as ministers for the new covenant. He gave us everything that we needed. He gave us everything that was important. He gave us, and he gives us still today, he gives us all that we need, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. We talk about the letter and the Spirit, and a lot of folks get this confused. A lot of folks talk about Spirit and letter. I had a man once use this argument on me that he said, I went by the letter of the law, and that he went by the spirit of what was said, and therefore I was wrong. This spirit and letter here is completely different than what a lot of folks use. It's not that idea of an attitude versus law. As we keep reading the text, one of the things we find out here is that what he's talking about is Old Testament versus New Testament. We see it really in the answer here of beginning back all the way in verse 3. The understanding then is, he says, there's contrast between spirit and letter. Under the old law, we talk about the old law, and we talk about the imperfection of the old law. The old law itself was not imperfect. What was the imperfection of the old law? Man's ability to keep it, right? I was thinking, I was going through the other day in my head, I thought, okay, what are some of the books of the Bible that we haven't talked about Sunday morning or Wednesday night or preached in or whatever? And trying to see maybe something we haven't covered in the 6 years I've been here that might be beneficial to all of us, me most specifically, and hopefully to you. And as I was thinking of Old Testament, and I was thinking of New Testament books, and I thought, haven't talked to them about Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I thought, no. Leviticus is just, it's good to read, I think. I think it's good to read. I think it's good to study. I think it's good to look at. But the minutia of the law, and then when you add to it the Jewish interpretation that the Jews lived by of the law, of how exact everything had to be. Suzanne sent me a short video this week. She does that. I get several a day from her, or in the evening. She does it at night. And this week, one of them was of children. And when I'm saying children, I'm saying probably 2 and 3 year olds helping mama in the kitchen. And one short video, and I told Suzanne, I said, they got exactly what they wanted, because she was telling me, oh, this was terrible. I said, they got exactly what they wanted because mama was videoing the baby. Mama had this conglomeration in the bowl, and she gave the child like a teaspoon and gave them an open bottle of, let's just say vanilla. I don't know what it was, but let's say vanilla, and said, put a teaspoon, and this child was probably 2, put a teaspoon of vanilla in the bowl for mama. And of course, the child just took the bottle and poured it up, didn't hit the spoon or nothing. Well, that was cute. 2-year-old. But now take that sentiment and try to do that with everything you did in life. All the sacrifices that had to be made, all the festivals that had to be kept, and the exact ways in which they had to be kept. Difficult. The new law, the New Testament, still has its commands, still has its law, if you will, of which we are to practice. But while we are to practice the law of God from the standpoint of the New Testament, the commandments, the teachings of God, we understand that there was grace and mercy and forgiveness. Oh, preacher, now you're implying there was no grace in the Old Testament. I've never said that. I think there was. Because the grace of the Old Testament is that if you keep my will, then you'll be my children. And you're doing what you're supposed to do. The ultimate grace came according to Hebrews chapters 9 and 10, in which it says Jesus died on the cross even for those under the Old Testament. And that's when they all received the ultimate grace of God. If there was not grace in the Old Testament, then Hebrews 11 is a lie. Because it talks about these great folks of faith and how they inherited heaven. And they could not, because they could not keep the law perfectly. So there was grace in the Old Testament. New Testament, though, is full of grace and full of mercy. And we're thankful for that, and we should be. Paul is addressing this idea, not of grace and mercy versus not, but the idea, as he's going to expound further in this chapter, of understanding where we are, which law we're under, and why it's important. And that's how he fleshes out the rest of this chapter. Is there anything anybody like to say? Ask? Say? Tell me I was wrong? Yeah.
I can go. Scripts, and it says, for the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. That confuses me today, as you said. But is there an explanation for it better than what we do?
I think the explanation for it is what follows. Other than that, no. Not that I'm not.
Very compelling.
Oh, it is. It is. And I wonder sometimes, and this is not a reflection or an answer, but I wonder sometimes if our confusion is not based upon the difference of interpretations from the standpoint of number, and the fact that we haven't let at least just the text speak for itself. So, and what I mean by that is this: when we come to a difficult passage, and I think this is a difficult passage, it's sort of like in chapter 1, we talked about being sealed by the Spirit of God, and we talked about what that meant. And there's several different interpretations with regards to being sealed. I think you take you look at the immediate context, but then you look at the whole Bible, and I think sometimes we all fail at that, not just folks that I don't agree with, but we all fail at that. And so I think we have to look at the context and just say, okay, this is what it says, and I can't go any further. I think too many people, in an effort to write too many books, have gone too far with too many things. That doesn't really answer your question. That's the politician answer. It doesn't answer your question. But I think you made a good point. But I don't know. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
There are some things that are parallel.
Yeah.
Differences that you see, so I see. I think politics, and I shouldn't talk about. But if you are a down Democrat, Joe Blow is the guy. They're going to be there because you're going to look at the same and draw different. So that happened with the but is it not happening today?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Every one of us reads the Bible with our own worldview. And you can call it something else. You can call it your own lens, your own perspective. And your worldview, your lens, your perspective, I'm going to call it worldview because that's kind of what we call it in theological world. Your worldview affects how you see in the scriptures you read. If you come from a certain belief, you will read Revelation one way. And I'm just pulling that out. You know, it could be Ezekiel. That's difficult. But I read it another. And so therein lies the difference because of how we see it, by what we're affected by. I really noticed this when the 11 months that I worked at Dow Tile before I came here. My supervisor was a good guy. Religiously, he was nothing. He'd never really gone to church. As a kid, he'd been in military school for a good portion of his schooling up north. He had served, I forgot now how many years in the military. He'd been over in Afghanistan, all that when all that was going on. And I really liked him. He's a good guy and good to me, really good to me. But when you would talk, every once in a while, he'd come up and talk to me because he knew I was a preacher. He'd come up and talk to me about the Bible. He had really no concept, to be honest, of the Bible, but what he did have from a concept religiously and everything he saw was Catholicism. And while I never told him that he was a leading Catholic, but I certainly don't want him to be that. That's how he viewed. And if anything was said about the Bible, that's really how he viewed it. And probably he had gotten somewhere some folks Catholicism, but now where he is on Sundays, I probably guarantee he's not in church. And where he is on Saturday nights, he's probably at least for a little while in a bar. And so that kind of gives you a sense. But he's a good guy. He's had a wife and child and loved me dearly and treated me well from what I gathered. But that if I were to bring him in now and sit him down and say, let's read something simple. Let's read Matthew. He would come away with a concept really of Catholicism. His view, his worldview. So yeah, that's for me what accounts for the difference. That makes it right. That's what accounts for the difference. We're affected, our worldview is affected by what we were raised in, what we come in contact with. Today, when I talk to people, and I don't get to talk to as many as used to, but when I talk to people today, most folks don't know what's in the Bible and really don't understand the idea of the Bible. I'm going to stop right there and begin getting my lesson a little bit. My son. So, Yeah,
Isn't that true with Christians?
absolutely. Absolutely.
There's no way that I understand the, this book that I should have, and I have studied,
Yeah. Well, no, yeah. Yeah, I can tell. I've talked to you enough. I know.
but those things, they really bother me. An example of that, classmate of mine, we grew up in the church, same Sunday class, same Wednesday night, Sunday night classes. We go to college. He gets married, marries an Episcopal. And at his death, he never had, he served in the church who would be going on. But he was not involved. And once he got married, everything that he knew, and he was a very blunt person, he threw out the window because he had married and was the baby. He was very involved in the church that he attended, both in the states that he lived in prior to moving back to the city, and in church in Nashville. How does that help?
I think it's an excellent question. I don't have
I expect an answer.
I don't have an answer. I can tell you a lot of equivalent stories. I won't, but I can tell you a lot of equivalent stories that I have run into. I think it's several things. I think it's several factors. And I don't know that it's, for person A, it might be one or two of these factors. For person B, it might be factors 5 and 6 that I could list. And for person C, it might be none of the above. I mean, so it's different for all different folks. Steve Higginbotham is a name that means nothing to you probably. Steve he was up in Bowling Green. He's over in Knoxville now. Steve was at Freed-Hardeman when I was at Freed-Hardeman. He is now, he's at Carnes in Knoxville. He preaches there, but then he also teaches in Southeast Biblical Institute as well. Steve was a classmate of mine at Freed-Hardeman. Great guy. And his wife was Suzanne in a lot of her classes because she was an education major. And they have a child that just has left the church. And what's her name? Steve's wife, anyway. She wrote a book about it. Very, very good. The factors that cause folks to leave, I think, is several. I think that, first of all, we could use Matthew 5, salt and light. We're all affected by somebody, and we all choose who affects us and what affects us. I think, second of all, some folks give up because of the facts they're not well grounded in really what they believe. Why do you believe what you believe? I still believe, and maybe we should explore this. I've said this once before, and somebody said it was a good idea. I think we all of us would benefit by sitting down. Jay gave me his, by the way. I think about it. I still got it. A list, and I don't mean turn them into me, but we all sit down and make a list of this is what we believe. Then go back after you figure out what you believe, ask yourself from a biblical standpoint of the religious things, not the political things, but the religious thing. Why do you believe that? What verse in the Bible has led you to that conclusion? Why do you believe what you believe? I think most of us, well, let me rephrase that. I think for some, that would be a difficult task. I mean, we could all start out, I believe God exists. Let me start your list. I believe God exists. I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I believe that Jesus Christ came to save the church. Now you go from there. What do you believe? and why. And I could give you book, chapter, and verse for all those. That's part of it. I think that there's a sense of rebellion. We're all rebellious. We're everyone rebellious by nature. How many times in your lifetime have you walked up and seen a wall and it had a little sign on it that says, "Don't touch wet paint," and touched it? It's just human nature. How many times did our parents tell us not to do something and we did it, knowing that there were consequences that were going to come? So I think that's part of it. I think back to a man that has passed away, that according to the story he told us at church, he was, as a young man, baptized for the remission of his sins, married a lady that was, I don't want to call names to disparage anybody, we'll just say of denominational world. He went to church with her. One day, because he had been talking to me and to the preacher at McDonald's, drinking coffee, and we had talked several times to him, he started coming to church. Went forward. And just about the time he went forward, he quit coming. And the preacher and I, we would see him at McDonald's, and we'd still talk and have conversations. Well, the upside of it is she made his life a living terror. And he just said his marriage was more important. And so he chose his marriage over the Lord. And then when she died, he came back to church. I think that's part of it. I think there is a greater influence by Satan in this world and on people's hearts and minds than we realize. On all of us. But it's sort of like the old story of this years ago, and it's probably one of those preacher stories that's made up, but it's of a guy that's out hunting, and he has sort of a uneducated guy with him, and the uneducated guy is a believer of God, and the guy that's hunting is not. And so he goes out and he kills bird. He's shooting, let's say pheasant hunting. He goes out and he shoots one that dies immediately, and then there's another one and he shoots it, and he kind of wings it. He doesn't kill it, and so he sends the young uneducated guy out, and he says, grab him first because he's alive, and of course hasten his death. And so the young guy does, and so the young guy comes back and he says, I finally figured it out. And the guy hunting says, what? He said, I figured out why the devil's after you more than he's after me. He says, why is that? And he says, because you're still alive. And he said, he's after you. But he said, I've already died to him. I don't want him. I want the Lord. Doesn't mean the devil's not after you. He's going to be after you, probably even greater, because he's already got those that are serving. But I think we have to understand the power of temptation. Why is it so important for us as Christians to come to church Sunday after Sunday, Wednesday after Wednesday? Why do we stress the idea of Bible study? Why do we stress the idea of Bible school? I mean, Bible school did not start until the Industrial Revolution. A fellow by the name of Robert Rakes started Bible school in Baptist church. Reason being, because during the Industrial Revolution, children were working and not going to school, and he started Bible school as a means to educate children on how to read and how to write. And it evolved through the years to what we have today. There's an influence. The Bible needs to be our influence. And every chance we get to study the Bible, in Bible school Sunday morning, Bible school Wednesday night, church Sunday morning, church Sunday night. Now, could we forego Wednesday nights, and could we forego having Bible school? Sure, why? Because Bible says nothing about it. It's worship. How many times do we worship on Sunday? Well, we worship twice. Well, can we forego one of them? Well, if the leaders decide not to have it, we can, because Part of studying the Bible, it says that we're to follow our leaders, Hebrews 13. So if they've set aside Monday, if they came up and said, plus everything, plus what we have now, we're going to study the Bible, we're going to get together on Monday nights and study. It would be interesting to see how many of us would say no, as opposed to say, well, they said it, we'll be there. It gets to that heart. What touches us? Does a movie touch us, or does a story out of the Bible touch us? How many folks are moved by the truth? How many folks want to be moved by the truth? That's just some. That's not all, in my opinion. Anybody got thoughts?
But can both be very effective? The movie and the Bible.
As long as it's a good movie.
The difference is most people go or watch a movie. Most people
Absolutely. For me, here's part of the reason why. When we begin to read the Bible, we get bits and pieces here and there. And it's hard to put the history together. The Bible's not arranged chronologically. And so consequently, we don't see the whole picture, and we don't study, we can't see the whole picture because of time. And it becomes very difficult to see the picture of the Bible. So you get this is exactly what I'm preaching this morning. So y'all gonna get double barrel. and it's sad. I think you are exactly right that most people go to a movie, but most people won't go sit down and read the Bible. And that's true in the church. And then I think we've got to throw in what James said. There's a lot of folks that James says, who looks into the mirror and goes their way and forgets what manner of man they are. And I still say, I've advocated this for years. If we would only study, or excuse me, if we would only set aside 15 minutes a day and practice this on a daily basis, it's sufficient. 15 minutes a day. Sit down in a quiet place. 5 minutes a day. And if you want to do more, fine. But minimum. 5 minutes of prayer. Get your mind, your heart right. 5 minutes of Bible reading. And then 5 minutes of meditation upon what you just read. To say, okay, what does this mean? How can I apply this? What is God trying to tell me? What does God want me to know? What does God want me to be? And then try to put those things in action. And you can use a lot of study helps. I think that's important. I also think it's important that we simplify as much as possible the Bible. We have argued for years about the right version of the Bible. And I think that there are some good versions of it. I think there are a lot of pathetic versions out there. Because this Bible is translated. It was mostly, the Old Testament was all but about 9 chapters was in Hebrew. But there's about 9 chapters of it that's in Aramaic. There's a couple of bits and pieces. Esther is mostly in Aramaic. But then there is, of course, the New Testament, Greek. And if you study the history of the Bible, what you find out is many even versions, not really what you call versions, but copies that were out there. And there's a divergence, and then they all came back together. It's a history. lesson that I'll be glad to talk to you in private. Most folks don't want to hear it. But I think we don't see the story of the Bible. We see, open your Bibles to Ezekiel 6. We're going to study that today. Today we're going to study 1 Timothy chapter 2. Today we're going to study, and I'll be honest, to preach through a book of the Bible, I've done it and would be glad to do it. Matter of fact, I'm planning on towards the end of the year on Sunday nights. We're probably going to go through 1 Thessalonians. And I preached, I was looking the other day, I preached through 1 Corinthians a few years ago, and it took me 3/4 of a year on Sunday morning and Sunday night to preach through it. You still don't get the gist of the story. I think we need the story. We probably need to see the story of the Bible. That's part of it. That's me. Spouting out. Spouting out. There are books, I will say this, there are books of the Bible, on the Bible. There are what they call Bibles that I think are worthy of looking into. I think the chronological Bible is a good idea for most people. It tries to, F. Thagard tried to arrange the Bible chronologically. I think he missed in a couple of places, but I heard him give a talk 2-3 years ago on it, but I heard him end of last year, first of this year, and he mentioned it. But anyway, I think that helps us see the whole story. There are other books. I have a book that was done by Randy Fries that is basically Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he tried to do it in chronological order, but he tried to do it with faith, and he didn't include everybody. He would just say, well, let's go to Luke 6, Mark 2, so forth. So sort of somewhat what the ladies are doing in class on Wednesday night, but to a different degree. And I think that helps us see the story. I think there are other books that are out there, but I think just sitting and reading the Bible, and maybe we need a class to try to pull it all together historically that just shows the order. I've done that. I've done an overview of the Bible 2-3 times. It's interesting. Anything else? It's a great subject. I've thought about it a lot here in the last. I get thinking about 2 classmates of mine at Freed-Hardeman that were really good Bible scholars, went on, and I don't know what other degrees they have other than their bachelor's because they went to other schools. One now is in the community church, and the other one, he started a church of his own out in Washington. And I was reading some of his writings about a year ago, and he never bothered to say, well, I found this thought in 1 Timothy 2:1. But he would say, I think. And he's got a following, because then I went and watched some of his videos. He's got a church. I don't know what happened to him. I could blame a lot of things. A lot of guys went to say, like Freed-Hardeman, and I'll just use Freed-Hardeman because that's me, that's where I was from. And they went off to pursue higher education. And I have nothing against higher education. I do have a master's degree. Would have liked more, but didn't get it. But we sent them to theologically inept schools to get their PhDs. And that teaching rubbed off on them. And one of the things that you have to do, Jay's daddy has his PhD. Brilliant mind. He wasn't affected by the false teaching And the false teaching probably made him stronger. Just knowing Jay's dad. I've known Jay's dad for quite a while. But a lot of guys have gone through the same process that Jay's dad has. And instead of standing up, they gave in. They compromised. And we have to ask ourselves, I want the church to grow more than anything in this world. I want everybody out there to believe what the Bible teaches. But I am not willing to compromise what the Bible says for church growth. And I think, and I'll just use for an example, the community church movement of today, that's what they're doing. They're compromising truth in order to put people in the pews. And in my opinion, we cannot compromise the truth for numbers. Do we need numbers? Yes. Are numbers important? Yes. Why? Because they represent souls. And I want to teach everybody, and I want everybody to believe the truth. But I'm not willing to compromise what God says for it. That's me. So if I'm not here next Sunday, y'all don't believe like I do. Anyway, anything else? I think it's a good stuff subject. Good point. Anything else? All right, let's go forward prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word, think about things that are true and things that really bother us. And we realize that there's a world out there that lies in darkness. There's a world that needs your light, and many of those folks just will not listen, sadly. Many of those folks will turn away the truth. And help us to learn the teaching that you taught in the limited commission of going out and shaking the dust off our feet. But Lord, help us to have the heart and mind that never says, well, I'll just give up. Help us to have the heart and mind that says, I'll teach somebody else. Give me someone else to teach. Give me someone else to influence. Lord, help me to have that heart and to have that drive. We ask that you be with us now, that you bless us and keep us. Forgive us of our sins, for this is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. I'll have a great day. Thank y'all.